Hello, this is Tommy Franks. Welcome to the 4-Star Leadership Podcast, a product of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. We're here to get a view into the lives of the legacy makers, the movers and the shakers of today, to offer insights from the full spectrum of the leadership community. We'll talk to former 4-star students and explore their leadership development path. We'll work to find out what they are about today and learn from the opportunities they've made for themselves in this world. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this podcast. Remember, leaders are not born, they're developed.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Core Principles of Leadership podcast with General Tommy Franks. I am your host, Jay Zacharias, and we have a great guest for you today. He served as a senior advisor to President George W. Bush and was also his deputy chief of staff at one time. Mr. Karl Rove is here to talk about what I learned about decision-making from 7 years at the White House. But before we get into that, we'll get a quick word from our main sponsor of the podcast, REI Oklahoma. REI Oklahoma is proud to be a part of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and the production and distribution of these podcasts designed to inspire leaders and difference makers. At REI Oklahoma, we have been working with small business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people who are driven to succeed for years. Highly motivated people working to own their own businesses, live in their own homes, and make the world a better place. Since its beginning, REI Oklahoma has continued to identify hurdles and deliver holistic solutions to create job growth and help neighborhoods thrive in both rural and urban communities. REI Oklahoma looks forward to visiting with you about helping your business and community grow. Visit reiok.org or call 800-658-2823 to start the conversation. And now for our guest of the hour, Karl Rove, an iconic political strategist and one of the most sought-after political brains of our time, is best known for his provocative and robust knowledge of the major political issues of the day. Mr. Rove served as a senior advisor to President George W. Bush from 2000 to 2007 and deputy chief of staff from 2004 to 2007. At the White House, he oversaw the offices of strategic initiatives, political affairs, public liaison and intergovernmental affairs, and was deputy chief of staff for policy, coordinating the White House policy-making process. Before Karl Rove became known as the architect of President Bush's 2000 and 2004 campaigns, he was president of Karl Rove Company, an Austin-based public affairs firm that worked for Republican candidates, non-partisan causes, and non-profit groups. Today, Mr. Rove writes a weekly op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, is a Fox News contributor, and is the author of the newly released book, The Triumph of William McKinley, Why the Election of 1896 Still Matters, and New York Times Bestseller, Courage and Consequence. We are very happy to welcome Karl Rove to the show. How are you, Karl?
I'm doing fabulous. How about you?
I'm blessed. I cannot complain.
Wouldn't do any good if you did, man. No good if you did.
No kidding. It doesn't help you if you complain. You just keep on moving forward. I can see Karl on the Zoom call to everyone that's listening, and he went and switched out his coffee into his Oklahoma mug. So,
yeah, my Oklahoma mug there, where the wind comes sweeping down the plains, it says on it.
That's absolutely right. That is absolutely.
It does not have, however, it's got a lot of towns here: Enid, Ponca City, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Lawton, Ardmore, but it doesn't have the home of the ranch. What the heck is going on here?
Well, I know it. What are they doing? What are they doing?
General Tommy Franks Ranch.
Hey, we'll get to work on that.
Get a new version of it.
That's right. We got to get to work on that. Well, Karl, we are so thankful for you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us on the podcast. And today we're going to be talking about what you learned about decision-making from 7 years at the White House, which I am so excited for. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about your upbringing and your family. Did you have brothers and sisters? Just what was your upbringing like?
Yeah, I'm one of 5.
Okay.
I have an older brother, 2 younger sisters, and a younger brother.
Wow.
So I'm number 2. I'm the Avis of the family. We try harder. My dad was a hard rock geologist, originally from Milwaukee, educated at the Colorado School of Mines. Mm-hmm. And my mother was from Denver. and family originally from Missouri. And I was born at St. Joe's Hospital in Denver, Colorado on Christmas Day, same hospital that John Kerry was born at. And it pissed him off no end that we shared that in common. I grew up in the Rocky Mountain West, Colorado, Nevada, Utah. My dad was a hard rock geologist, so we moved around a bit as he worked for different kind of mining and chemical companies.
Right.
And went to elementary school in Arvada, Colorado, and junior high in Sparks, Nevada, and high school in Holiday, Utah, and then went to the University of Utah for a couple of years. And but in the midst of that, fell into politics, which is strange because my family was completely apolitical. My mother, bless her soul, had no coherent political philosophy. She voted for the Republicans one year in a straight ticket because I was working in a Republican campaign, my first paying job in politics. And the next election voted for the Peace and Freedom Party because my older brother liked Eldridge Cleaver, who was running for president that year on that ticket. And my dad literally never told me until he was in his 70s who he ever voted for. He had gone to work and when I went to high school, he went to work in Los Angeles for Getty Mining, for the Getty Oil Company, which had a big mining division. And he then later retired to the Palm Springs. And I was down visiting with him when they were recalling Governor Gray Davis in the early 2000s. And I was talking to him about it, and he was all revved up about replacing Gray Davis. And he said, I'm going to vote for Arnold Schwarzenegger in the election. And I said, Dad, that's the first time you've ever told me who you voted for. And he said, and it will be the last. I mean, he was a very taciturn Norwegian from the Midwest, so they don't share a lot of things. You know, they look at their shoes and maybe they occasionally tell you they love you, but that's about it.
Right. Well, I mean, that gives us a little insight on you and kind of where you came from. You know, man, you moved around so much, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. But, you know, it was good. I mean, we lived in the West, and that sort of formed my attitude about life. The West is a place of big skies and big possibilities, and government seems far away. And, you know, personal responsibility matters a lot, and your word is your bond. A lot of the things that we as Texans and you as Oklahomans, you know, that's the ethic of the West. And
absolutely.
And then, of course, like everybody, I had a great teacher. I had a high school teacher named Eldon Tolman, who saw in me an interest in politics, and he was a very fussy guy. Always wore a bow tie. He was everything I was not. He was a Democrat. He was a official in the union, teachers union, and he never addressed you informally. You were never by your first name. You were always by your Mr. or Miss and your last name. And he said, Mr. Rove, everyone in this class will be able to get an A by satisfactory completion of the coursework, except you. If you want an A, you got to go get involved in a political campaign. So I did.
There you go.
About all I had in high school was A's, man. I was not cool like you, Jace. I had hush puppies. They weren't cool back then. I carried a briefcase starting in the 5th grade. I wrote my first, civics paper in the 5th grade. Most people say, here's the Declaration of Independence or the 3 branches of government. I wrote mine on the theory of dialectical materialism. I didn't know who this guy Karl Marx was, but he sounded like a bad guy.
Right.
Anyway,
so you were after it from a young age.
Yeah, young man.
Young. So, for our listeners, as you served as a senior advisor and deputy chief of staff for President Bush, that was during the time that General Franks was the head of CENTCOM, the commander-in-chief of CENTCOM. Tell me a little bit about y'all's first interaction. When did you first meet, and how did y'all's relationship develop over your careers?
Well, you know what? It's amazing. I can't remember when I first met the general. It might have been on a trip to Tampa, or it might have been sometime when he came to the White House. I do remember getting to spend some time with him after September 11th.
Right.
I was not part of the war-making cabinet, but I was in and out of the Oval and got to meet him then. And then we developed a friendship over the years, and we've traveled together. We had a fantastic trip together that my wife organized with her father, and her father is a great friend of General Franks, has become over the years a great friend. They're great hunting buddies. Mm-hmm. And Tom Johnson, my father-in-law, and my wife Karen organized a fantastic trip to go to Normandy for the 70th anniversary. And we went with General Franks and Miss Franks and a bunch of our pals, and Tom Johnson, my father-in-law, and his wife, Karen's mother, passed away a number of years ago. And we had a lot of fun. And we had a professor who knows everything about D-Day from an academic perspective,
Right.
but we had General Tommy Franks who knows the inside story. So that
Right.
we'd have the academics say, now we think that this happened because of the following, and
Right.
blah, 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 blah. And the Allies were thinking perhaps this, or they were thinking that. And General Franks would say, well, let me tell you what they were thinking. And what they
Right.
were doing. And it was a fantastic trip. We had so much fun and learned so much and went so many wonderful places and understood the sacrifice and the determination and the grit and character of the American soldier in World War II as a result of that shared experience. But we also understood how close a thing it was. I mean, to think about what could have gone wrong.
Oh my goodness.
And one of the most great moments on that trip was I'm a friend of Winston Churchill's granddaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd arranged for a private tour of the wartime bunker in London. And then she took us out for a private tour of his country home, Chartwell, where he spent a lot of the weekends. And we had a wonderful trip. And then we went to Portsmouth and got on a ferry to go to Cherbourg, where we were going to hook up on our Normandy trip. And we got to go with 46 veterans. There were 46 veterans on that day, and on that ferry from D-Day veterans. And we went, of course, they were all in their 80s and 90s.
Right.
And they were thrilled to see General Franks. I mean, this is like, it's like, meeting, Yogi Bear or Mickey Mantle. Or I mean, it's like, oh my God, it's Tommy Franks. And so they really enjoyed it. I got to interview a bunch of them, and it was shocking. I mean, there was a man there originally from Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
He turned 16 the day after he jumped in to Normandy on D-Day.
Wow.
And he had lied about his age
in
order to get into the military. And he was 15 when he signed up. And I said, well, how'd you pull that off? And he said, well, I was big for my age. And his dad, who was a coal miner, said, if you want to fight, go fight. And signed the papers saying that he was 18 years old. But he was 15 when he signed up. And on June 7th, 1944, he turned 16. He was a paratrooper. He was dropped like 20 miles away from where it was supposed to be. Somehow or another, he and 6 other guys from the 101st and the 82nd knit up with each other. And it took them 6 days to fight their way back to the beachhead. They would move only at night because they were, surrounded by Germans. And I mean, think about that. That's what saved the world. We're gritty little teenagers from everywhere across America who believed in what America stood for.
Absolutely.
And gave it all.
I cannot imagine that sort of sacrifice and the gravity of the situation. That is definitely on my bucket list to make it over there one day, just because.
Gotta do it.
Was that your first trip to Normandy?
No, my first one was on the 60th anniversary of D-Day, which was 2004. And I was with the President of the United States. So that was a spectacular. We went to Point de Hoc.
Mm-hmm.
We went to the beachheads, Omaha, Utah, and it was pretty spectacular then. But on the 70th, it was a little bit more leisurely, and we had a lot more time, and more importantly, we had a great professor, and we had, even more important than that, a fantastic general who had studied the battle and all of its implications in the entire campaign from the moment that they hit the beach to the breakout. Where they began to push the Germans back towards the Rhine. General Franks had studied it all, knew it all, and had such fantastic insights, because he'd particularly interested in not how it looked from the top, but how it looked from the bottom, which gave me an insight to his sense of leadership. Mm-hmm. He understood that a general is not simply moving these anonymous groups of people around.
Absolutely.
But he's also understood that those anonymous groups are composed of individuals, and the strength of the unit depends upon the willingness of the individual to fight and to give it all. And something he understood, and it's also something that Dwight Eisenhower understood, which is why Eisenhower, the day before, went and met with the troops and looked them in the eye and thanked them and gave them confidence and told them that he was leading them into battle. I mean, he wanted literally to be close to the beach and move onto the beachhead quickly, and was dissuaded from doing so. But others of his officers, including Theodore Roosevelt Jr., hit the beachhead. General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. hit the beachhead and died of a heart attack, I believe it was. But
wow.
it was an amazing story. But I learned something about Tommy and his General Franks and his leadership style when he talked about it from the perspective of what the individual grunt was thinking about and what was motivating him and how so much was done to keep him in the fight by, that was questions of logistics and supply and morale and leadership and clarity and support. And it was really an interesting lesson in leadership.
And I think that's a perfect segue into one of our first key points. And in the same way that General Franks has to analyze every single angle and take every metric into consideration when making so many decisions that put other people's lives in danger because they're going to fight in war. You had a very similar situation in the White House. I mean, the decision-making process was probably more chaotic than I can ever imagine. So your first key point is aligning authority and responsibility. Tell us a little bit about how chaotic but controlled that was within the White House in your tenure.
Well, it wasn't chaotic.
It wasn't.
And that's the point. And one of the reasons is because George W. Bush, having seen, people like, look, he's the good old boy from Midland, Texas.
Right. Absolutely.
And Laura Bush, his wife, went to school with General Franks in Midland,
yes.
Texas. But he's also a Yale history major and a Harvard MBA and had been governor of the second biggest state in the Union,
right.
Texas. And he understood from those experiences in business and in government and from watching his father as vice president and his father as president, that no president of the United States can make all the decisions. The president of the United States has to clear his deck so that the decisions that come to him, he can make with clarity and thoughtfulness, because only tough decisions come there. First thing to do is to align authority and responsibility. To say to people, you're in charge and you will be held responsible.
Absolutely.
And you have to know what you're doing, tell us what you're doing, give us, if something needs to be decided, is it something that can be made at your level or is it has to be moved up the ladder? But this was a way for the president to say, okay, I'm setting a principle. I'm showing you my vision. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you how I think. And from there, I'm going to put you in charge. And you know the goal. It's
right.
up to you to figure out how to get to the goal. And if you need additional authorities outside those that already exist in law and regulation to get there, then fine, there's a process to arrive at as to whether or not that can be done. But you know what the goal is, and I want you to come back with recommendations on how to get to the goal, and be prepared to, in a process to tell us that. And that's a way that, it's really important. The most valuable thing a president of the United States has is time, and time is finite. Other presidents had reputations for showing up at, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they'd, be there at 1 o'clock in the morning with, sort of college style bull sessions going on in the Oval Office.
Right.
And that ain't good. There are also presidents, poor Jimmy Carter, he literally was, he included among his responsibilities signing off on who was going to use the White House tennis court, which was a waste of time.
Right.
So, you got to be, first of all, respectful of the people that are working for you, because you don't want to wear them out. And on the other hand, you also have to be respectful of your own time, so you don't waste it on things that are best left to somebody else.
Right.
So and that starts with figuring out, how do I align authority and responsibility? And then how do I give vision and a sense of the goal and the principles by which we're going to operate, so that people can then take the authority that I've given them and help devise how to achieve the goal.
Absolutely. And so what you just kind of touched on in that one key point, you touched on all four core principles that General Franks holds dear and what leads us in our Leadership Institute in caring about those around you, having the respect for those that you work with, not just moving the pieces where you want them to go, but knowing them and caring about what can I do to help you in these situations, to have, as you said, a common vision, being able to say, we're going this way, this is why we're going this way, and this is why we should believe in this plan. And everyone being on the same page through communication.
Right.
This is what I'm saying. Are you hearing this correctly? Are you interpreting it differently? And all of that is just a well-oiled machine within the White House, and especially that administration, so that no wires were getting crossed. So I enjoy that you said there was no chaos, because from the get-go, there was so much structure laid forth beforehand.
It wasn't on my list of 4 principles, but you touched on it. You do have to care about your people. And one of the things Bush said at the beginning was, I know that there will be a tendency for you to stay here to 8 or 9 o'clock at night, but unless you have something that you have to do, you're not impressing me, because I want you to pay attention to your families. I want you to pay attention to yourself. I want you to exercise. I want you to take care of yourself. I want you to take care of your relationships with your family, because if you burn out, you're no good to me.
Absolutely.
And it's going to be harder to replace you. You know, the longer you can stay here and do your job with excellence, the better off the country is going to be, and the better off I'm going to be. And That's why, look, the average tenure of a senior White House aide is 18 months. I was there nearly 7 years. There were people in the Bush administration who served 8. Right. He had 2 White House chiefs of staff. There are presidents who've had 2 White House chiefs of staffs within a year. Right. And yet he had 8 years in which he had 2, which is a very demanding job. And part of the reason was Bush cared about his people, to make it fun for their families, to insist that you make time for your families, to insist that you make time for yourself. And he made it an exciting and fun way to work. Right. A fun place to work. And that was really important. And it's important for the country, because you really do want to attract good people, have them do a great job, and stay for as long as they can. And then when there's time for a change, to be able to make that change with respect for them and attention to who their replacement is going to be. That does, though, lead me to the second task. And one of the ways that Bush made it fun to work there was by insisting that people tell him what actually was going on. Right. A president of the United States can quickly get isolated. He's the most powerful person in the world. Right. And as a result, people want to please him. You know, many a time I'd have a member of Congress call me and say, you know what, Bush is screwing it up. He's from top to bottom, he's screwing it up. Your Secretary of Blank is a moron. You know, if you were doing it, you're doing X, I think you ought to do Y. And by God, if I had 5 minutes with him, they'd come to see me and say, if I had 5 minutes with him, I'd tell him what to do. And I'd say, you know what, Senator, his schedule's free. Why don't we just go see him? Let's walk 10 feet down the corridor and knock on the door. He'll love to see you. And we walk in there, and suddenly the guy who had the answers and, blah, you were screwing it up. Here's how he'd walk in there. Hey, Mr. President, you're looking good. How are you? Laura, how's she doing? She's terrific. How's that dog, Barney? You doing good? Is Barney doing good? And I mean, all these thoughts would go out. Right. And that's just going to happen. Right. But it is really important for a president to create an environment in which people can speak plainly and walk in and say, Mr. President, with all due respect, you're not looking very pretty. It's tough to do that. It's easy. Absolutely. You can say it's easy, but it's really tough. Absolutely. And I saw Bush work at it every single day. And some of it was really neat to watch. So, you'd be sitting there in the Oval Office, and you'd have the secretary, you'd have Condi Rice sitting on one couch, and on the other couch, the two in front of the fireplace would be a chair for the president, chair for the vice president, two couches facing each other. Correct. Condi be on one couch with her deputies, and then there'd be a junior level G woman from the Bureau of Widgets and Gadgets sitting on the other couch, taking the opposite view, and everybody be bringing their A game. And if you did bring your A game, even if you lost, Bush would turn to the level 3 person from the Bureau of Widgets and Gadgets and say, you did really good today. Really good. Thank you. And you can imagine what that would do for their morale. Absolutely. And on the other hand, if they didn't bring their A game, Bush would say, you know what? I think you all need to go back and consider this some more. I don't think you got this thing cooked exactly right. Right. But making people understand, I want you to say tough things to me, and I want you to lay out all the things on the table, was really important.
Let's take a quick sponsorship break, and we'll be right back with Karl Rove. Hello, this is Jay Zacharias with the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum, and I would like to tell you about one of our partner sponsors. His name is Justin Krieger, and he has worked as an independent insurance agent at Krieger Insurance Agency in his hometown of Hobart, Oklahoma since 1999. Justin is honored to help with the annual Celebration of Freedom event and has been a board member for the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum for many years. He is also a fifth-generation farmer and rancher in Kiowa County. where cattle, crops, and even insurance is sold with a handshake. Give him a call at 580-726-3076 or come by the office if you would like to speak with Justin Krieger or Kathy Langford about insurance. We are thankful to our customers and friends who have supported us through the years. Again, Justin would like to say how honored he is to live in such a great country and how proud he is to help sponsor these podcasts. Please enjoy the rest of this podcast experience from your friends at Krieger Insurance Agency. And now back to the episode.
Can I tell you a funny story about that?
Absolutely. Please do. Please do.
So Bush he knew this from in his bones. And so he operated this way.
Mm-hmm.
May or June of 2000, he's secured the Republican nomination. He's thinking about his vice president. We're looking at 9 people.
Mm-hmm.
We have an exhaustive process to vet them. The process is being laid by a Dallas businessman, former Secretary of Defense, Richard B. Cheney, president of Halliburton. And the more this process has gone on over the spring from, January, February, March, April, May, the more Bush is liking the guy who's in charge of the process. And he's thinking about asking Cheney to be his running mate. Right. And he knows I'm against it. And so he's out on the campaign trail and calls me up and says, I'm going to be back tonight, as you know. I want you to come to the mansion at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I want you to make the case why I shouldn't go with Cheney. Bring your best arguments.
Right.
So the next morning I show up. Now, Texas, we're not fancy like Oklahoma with a fancy governor's mansion. Our governor's mansion was built in 1854 when there were Comanche Indians 20 miles to the west.
Right.
And the governor of the state of Texas lives in a 1,300 square foot apartment on the second floor. And the first floor is all public rooms, and one of them is the Austin Library.
Really?
And so we we meet in the Austin Library. I'm in one chair. Bush is in a comfortable chair on the other side of the room, 5 feet away. And he says, it's 10 o'clock. He says, okay, tell me why I shouldn't go with Cheney.
Mm-hmm.
So I lay out my 8 reasons why we shouldn't go with Cheney. Number one is don't need to worry about Wyoming. That's where Cheney was from.
Right.
Got 3 electoral votes. We haven't lost it since 1964. Got to think about a swing state.
Right.
Rule number 2, Cheney had his first heart attack at age 34. He's been working on perfecting it ever since. He's had 3 more. People are going to say he's not going to last 4 years.
Right.
He was a very conservative congressman from a very conservative state 18 years ago, and he cast some stupid votes you're going to be held accountable for. For example, he's one of 3 members of the U.S. House of Representatives to vote against the resolution calling on the apartheid regime of South Africa to release Nelson Mandela from the island prison where there's no doctor and move him to the mainland prison where there is a doctor. This isn't let him out of prison. It is at least allow the guy to be able to see a doctor because he's sick. And Cheney's one of 3 guys to say, that ain't our role. We've worked really hard to develop the image of you as your own guy, independent-minded guy, not the mini-me to your dad. So what the hell? Let's pick the guy who's Secretary of Defense for your dad in a time of war. Everybody's going to be saying Cheney's running the West Wing. We got to, there's a problem in the Midwest and the Northeast with you being a Texas oil man. What the hell? Let's double down and get the guys running the world's largest oil field service equipment company to be your running mate. That's going to make the issue go away. We got a 12th Amendment problem, which, I can get into that. But anyway, so I have my 8 reasons. Now, Bush is not a monologue guy. So as I'm laying out these reasons, this is like World Wrestling Federation. So I'll say stupid voting. I'll say nobody's going to ever bring that one up. And that's only one. Well, I've got 3 more stupid votes. Let me tell you about it. Nobody's going to be, people don't know what Halliburton is. Mr. Governor, by the end of the campaign, they'll know that Halliburton is the world's largest oil field service company. Right. Anyway, so this is 35 minutes of it. I literally, when I'm finished, I can't open my jacket because I realize I've sweat through my shirt. But I've laid out my case as to why it shouldn't be Cheney.
Right.
But when I finished, Bush says, "Do you got anything else?" I said, "No, that's it." He says, "Good, really good, really good. You've made a good case." Turns to the guy sitting next to him and says, "Dick, got any questions for Karl?"
Oh,
Cheney had been sitting there for all 30 minutes as I wailed on him.
Oh my goodness!
Bush was sending 2 messages. One message he was sending was to Cheney. I want people around me who are going to be strong people whom you might not always agree with.
Absolutely.
And he was sending a message to me too, which is, this is how we're going to run things. You're
Right.
happy. I'm happy you have ideas,
Mm-hmm.
but you better be willing to bring those ideas to somebody who may not feel so happy about them or agree
Right.
with them.
Right.
And that's how he ran his time. And look, Cheney, as we're walking out, Cheney said, I agree with some what you have to say. And then, because he was reluctant to do it.
Right.
But when we were in the White House, we became close friends. He gave me terrific advice. He treated me with great respect. I have a great admiration for him, but it was a very important lesson. And Bush wanted it, and he did that continually. Okay, you got a great idea, Secretary so-and-so. I want you to repeat that idea in front of people who don't agree.
Absolutely.
And people understood. People became quick to realize, I'm not going to be the last guy in the room. I'm going to have to lay out my views, and I'm going to have to know that there are people who, may disagree with me. And Bush worked hard to make certain that the disagreements were respectful disagreements, because you can have disagreements that turn ugly and bitter.
Absolutely.
And people are screaming at each other and yelling at each other. Bush wasn't going to tolerate anything close to that.
Right.
And so it made it a great place to work, because if you were in a place where you could understand that it didn't matter. I mean, you weren't wetting your finger, putting it in the air and saying, oh God, what's the boss thinking so I can agree with him? You
Right.
knew you scored points for walking in and saying, I got a view, might be different from yours.
Absolutely.
And you got rewarded for it. And which, there are two other things that spring from that. Number 3 is on my list of top leadership lessons, springs directly from that, is you better have a process. Because a process in which people understand, who's in charge of this issue, who has got a seat at the table to discuss that issue.
Right.
Can you all come together and agree on what the issue is about and what the facts are and what the options are and what the arguments are, plus and minus on those.
Right.
If there's a consensus on it, that makes the decision easy. You walk in and say, Mr. President, you asked us to look at X. We all agree that it ought to be Y. And, and here's why we believe that. Everybody agrees it ought to be Y. That's a quick decision. The president says, great, you all agree, authority, responsibility, go get it done.
Right.
If there's a disagreement, then it requires him to make a decision. But you got to have it so that, you don't have the decisions being made by the last person to get in and tell the president something.
Mm-hmm.
Or worse than that, have the decision made by the president on the basis of insufficient information and unclear understanding of what the options are, and little thought given to what the ramifications of various options are. And so the president insisted on, a process. So you would have the deputies meeting begin the discussions, and then you'd have the principals meeting to see if they could clarify it. And then when you went to the president, you put it in writing, and that piece of writing was circulated so people could comment on it. And there was an impartial umpire who was sitting there receiving the comments on it so that they could make sure that everybody had a chance to make the strongest possible arguments, whatever they were, not so that you could weaken the arguments of somebody else. Anyway, process matters. And process, first of all, causes people to think harder and think more deeply, and it allows the president to have more information on which to make decisions. I'm working on a book for Simon & Schuster on presidential decision making, and I'm interested in decisions in which the president knows he doesn't know enough. So the question is, how does he get more information? And how does that affect his decision making? But process helps every president make decisions. Now, you want it to be robust, but you also want it to be economical. You don't want it to be, it's going to take us weeks or months to make decisions that ought to be made in days or hours. Once you build a team that recognizes that there's a process and understands that they can speak plainly and that there is an alignment of authority and responsibility, all of those things sort of mutually reinforce each other. They're sort of a virtuous circle of reinforcement.
Absolutely.
The final lesson, which I spring from all of that, is that this whole process has to be approached with a sense of humility. When you go to work in the White House, you got a lot of high-powered people. I mean, a lot of people who think they're smart, and they are, and who have strong convictions, and they do, and who can come to an opinion, and they often do. But you also have to have a certain leveling of humility, because you may not be right.
Absolutely.
And you have to listen. You have to keep your mind open. You have to consider that there's all the information that you hear. You have to step back for a moment and examine, take your personhood out of it, take
Absolutely.
your own personal investment in it, and step back and say, is what I've just heard and is the option that has just been, is that better than what I've been thinking? And many is a time that I've thought that I knew what the answer ought to be. And if I listened carefully to others, I'd say, wait a minute, this is a heck of a lot better. And, they have put their finger on a fatal flaw in the approach I was advocating. And this is a better way to go.
Absolutely. And all 4 key points that you've brought forward touch so heavily on caring, communication, common vision, and character. Because like you said, especially in that last one, and it seems like so much today that we don't have enough humility. We stand on what we're standing on, and there is nothing that will make us listen. Not that we don't want to change our minds, but some people don't understand. They're not listening. They're listening to respond maybe, but they're not listening to hear you. And like you said, maybe you do have a better idea than me. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe there is something that I need to change.
There is a hierarchy of commitment.
Absolutely.
We should be most committed to our principles. We should be less committed to the means of executing those principles. We should all be, clear on the goal. We should be flexible in the means to achieve the goal. And you used a word a few seconds ago that I used when we were talking about aligning authority and responsibility. Vision. Without vision, the people perish, says in the good book. And absolutely true. And that the president has to be the vision giver. He has to be able to say, here are my principles. Here's where I want to take the country. Here's the vision of what I want our achievement to be. Now help me figure out how to get it done.
Absolutely. And for a lot of our 4-star students and alumni that are listening right now, really take this to heart, because in today's time, it is more important than ever to surround yourself in the same way that Karl said that President Bush had, with people that did not agree. It's so easy to surround yourself with people that are just going to say, yep, that's great. You have the harder conversations when you are surrounded by people that might not agree with you, and you get a lot better of an end result when you have all these different viewpoints.
But don't underestimate the difficulty of it.
Oh, absolutely.
When Bush got ready to run for president, when Governor Bush got ready to run for president, I'd run a business for 18 years, a political consulting, government affairs, direct marketing firm. And he said, I want you to get rid of it. I want you to be focused entirely on me, not on your business and other people. So I sold it. It took 18 years worth of blood, sweat, equity, and
absolutely
sold it. So I was in. And after he won, the day after, he formally accepted the presidency after the Supreme Court decision, we were in the governor's mansion. He said, isn't it great? We've known each other for a long time. I met him when I was 23. And he was 26. So we've known each other a long time. He said, isn't it great? We're going to be going to Washington, working in the White House together.
Right.
And I said, I'm not certain I'm going. He said, what are you talking about? I said, look, I've talked to a lot of people who worked for Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, your dad, Clinton. And they all said the same thing, which is, if you ever get a chance to work in the White House, it'll be the greatest opportunity you'll ever have. But it'll also be the worst experience, because you'll go to work in the White House and you'll say something in a meeting and somebody will leak it to the New York Times and make you look like an idiot, twist it and make you look like a fool. And one guy told me, he said the first time he went to a meeting in the Reagan White House, he walked into the Roosevelt room. There are only 2 meeting rooms in the West Wing. The cabinet room that's used generally when the cabinet meets or when members of Congress come down to meet personally with the president. But most of the business meetings in the White House take place in the Roosevelt room. And he walked into a meeting in the Roosevelt room, and there was a woman holding a clipboard, and she said, are you a Meese person or a Baker person? Because Jim Baker and Ed Meese were so at loggerheads with each other, they put their people on opposite sides of the table. So if they couldn't get physical. And sort of horrified the guy, and horrified me too. And so I said to the president-elect, I said, I'm pretty good at campaigns, but I'm not very good at internecine warfare. And I'm not certain that I'll be useful. And he said, you know what? Come. He said, I know what you're talking about. He said, I saw what it did to Reagan's administration. He said, I saw what it did to my dad's, and I'm not going to let it happen to mine. And there'll be bumps, but come, because we're going to be in a place where we can work together and we can achieve big things for the country. But I want people around me who'll speak plainly. I want you to, tell me what you think. And I'm going to make sure that we have that. And he knew right from the beginning that in order to align authority and responsibility and create an environment in which people could speak plainly and set a process would help him make good decisions and encourage a certain level of humility, it needed to start with vision at the top and a leader who was committed to creating that kind of an environment. And as a result, it was a joy to work there.
Absolutely. General Franks, one of his favorite quotes he always says is, to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. And you kind of touched on that earlier. This year for our 4-star program, for our 70 students that are selected from around the world, we are bringing in Constituting America, this organization that helps teach our students how to have a civic conversation. And so I think all of your points speak so well to them. But if you had one bit of advice to give to the young generation on how to disagree without being disagreeable, what would your message be to the 2021, 4-star students?
Well, it's a derivative of the final point about humility.
Right.
In any organization, there are going to be decisions you agree with and decisions you disagree with. And there are going to be times where you're right and there are going to be times where you're wrong.
Yep.
And the best way to be able to make it through there is to not take this all personally, to keep an open mind about what's the best way forward,
right?
What's the best way to achieve what we mutually agree we want to achieve, and realize that today you may, that the guy who's on the other side of the table disagreeing with you today may be the guy or gal that tomorrow agrees with you.
Right.
You may be right today, but you could be wrong tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And you're going to be stronger as a team if you recognize that by working in concert with each other and keeping an open mind and digging in deep into the issues that confront you and going through a process in which everybody has to examine what they think the facts are, what they think the options are, what they think the strengths and weaknesses of those options are, and consider it with a little bit of distance and humility, that you'll arrive at better decisions.
Absolutely. Karl, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on and talk about your 4 key points and give a little insight on how you were able to create a structure of decision-making within the White House over your career and how well it worked and how well it can work for all of our listeners. For all of our listeners that might want to get more info on you, listen to you speak more, where can they go to find you?
Well, I have a website, rove.com.
Okay.
You can sign up there for I send out a little weekly bulletin that has a link to my Wall Street Journal column. I write for the Journal every Thursday. It has a schedule of my Fox News appearances. I also include a little memo on something that I've seen in polling data that's interesting. And then I take 3 articles that I've run across in the previous week that I think are worth reading. Some of them are from scholarly journals. Some of them are people's blog posts, but it's free, and I promise to only send it to you once a week. I also have I give speeches for through the Harry Walker Agency in New York, and I write books for Simon & Schuster. I've got 2 books out, a White House memoir, Courage and Consequence. It's not about my courage. It's about a guy that I worked for who had courage and the consequences of his leadership. And then I wrote a book on the election of 1896 called The Triumph of William McKinley. One of the more political scientists considered the election of 1896 one of the 5 great realigning elections in American history, but nobody's told the story of the story. And so I got inside the election of 1896, which features a remarkable cast of characters, many of whom have really cool nicknames like the Boy Orator of the Platte and the Napoleon of Protection, or Silver Dick. And anyway, it's a great story.
2 great reads. I highly recommend them. We appreciate your time. We appreciate you for being a friend of the General and the museum and the Leadership Institute. And we will definitely catch you next time. Okay.
Great. Thank you. Give my best to the General and, more importantly, to Mrs. Franks.
Absolutely. We sure will.
All right.
Thanks, Karl.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you again to REI Oklahoma for making this podcast possible. For nearly 40 years, the board, staff, patrons, and supporters of the nonprofit economic development REI Oklahoma are committed to expanding Oklahoma's economic prosperity, earning the reputation of being one of the most comprehensive economic development organizations in the country. Business loans, training workshops, business consulting, and networking opportunities, as well as technical assistance and even commercial business space, are made available to Oklahoma entrepreneurs and small businesses. For low and moderate income individuals and families, down payment and or closing cost assistance is offered. Learn more at reiok.org. This has been the 4-Star Leadership Podcast. Now it's your turn, 4-Star listeners. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what you thought of this episode. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and tune in next month for our next episode that airs every last Friday each month. Go be great.